Welcome. Welcome to those people to the stage.
Oh wow!
Thank you.
Today I'm going to be talking about vocal percussion, which is a common term for what many know today as human beatboxing. Now, the reason I say human is because a beatbox by itself is a machine that creates drum, percussive, and special effects sounds, the kind of sounds that many solo artists use in their recording studios in place of drums. So, human beatboxing is when a person attempts to imitate these sounds, along with other inhuman noises. At the same time, they use their larynx, lungs, vocal cord, teeth, tongue, lips, gums, and nose simultaneously. And of course, perhaps the most important part of beatboxing, at least in my opinion, is to make sure that your right arm spazzes out seemingly uncontrollably when you perform. To the point where after your performance, people come up to you, don't even say anything, and just go like this. Now, I'll get into why I do this a little bit later, but first I want to talk a little bit about the history of beatboxing. Now, beatboxing can be traced back a few thousand years ago to the two countries where everything is created, India and China. Now, the two forms of vocal performing art that most closely mimicked beatboxing were called Indian bowl and Chinese koji. Now, Indian bowl is a form of performing art where a person attempts to imitate the tabla, which is an Indian drum. In Chinese koji, people make animals with their hands using shadows, and they create stories, and they try to mimic the sounds of the animals. Now, in addition to the Indians and the Chinese, the Africans used percussive sounds to supplement their tribal chants. And many of these sounds are very similar to the ones that beatboxers use today. Now, clearly beatboxing has evolved from these forms, and it was not until the 1970s when beatboxing became integrated into the hip-hop movement. It all began on the streets, when street performers started rapping. And they realized that they couldn't bring their drum sets into the street, and they needed a beat, thus beatboxing. But it was not until the 1980s when beatboxing became popular all around the world and all around the nation. And this was when two key pioneers came on the scene, by the names of Derek Robinson, or Buffy, and Douglas E. Davis, or Doug E. Fresh. Now, Buffy was a member of the Fat Boys, and this group was the first to publicly show beatboxing to everyone. And Buffy's style of beatboxing was extremely interesting, and it evolved from his inability to breathe effectively. Now, what I mean by that is Buffy did not know how to breathe and beatbox at the same time. So he had to come up with a way to integrate his breathing into his beatboxing. So you get funky sounding things, kind of like this. Now, when put into a beat, it sounds a little bit cooler, something like this. Now, at the same time as Buffy, Doug E. Fresh was traveling around the world showing off his style, and he was known as the original human beatbox. Now, Doug E. Fresh, his most popular contribution to the beatboxing world was the click roll, which sounds a little bit like this. And when put into a beat, something like this. Now, Doug E. Fresh and Buffy carried their styles into the mid-1990s to early 2000s when a man named Roselle M. Brown came around. And he was able to revolutionize beatboxing and take it to a whole new level. And what he did is he could hum, sing, and beatbox at the same time. Now, sadly, I can't do a demo for you today, mainly because I can't sing, but I can do all that other stuff. Okay, so by 2008, beatboxing took another turn with the coming of dubstep, where artists started to use sounds that had more bass in them, and sounds like this.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
As well as vocal scratching, which sounds a little bit like this.
Boom, zippity, cappity, cappity, peary, cappity, yeah, boom, zippity, cappity, cappity, peary, I'll roll that boom, give it a bit, minute, Scooby-Doo.
So, these were going on. And by 2011, a cappella groups became extremely popular, especially with the Pentatonics. Now, the Pentatonics had a beatboxer named Kevin Olasula, and he was able to beatbox and play the cello simultaneously, which created a whole new genre called cello boxing. It's kind of cool. Also, since 2002, there have been 3 World Beatboxing Championships, as well as many National Beatboxing Championships. Now, personally, I began beatboxing the summer before my sophomore year, when my parents banned drum sets from my house because they were too loud. So, I looked for another thing to do, and I found beatboxing on the internet. So, I learned for about a year from YouTube videos and tutorials, and I was finally able to feel comfortable enough, not beatboxing in my shower, but beatboxing publicly in front of everyone. So I started performing with Prep, and I performed with some a cappella groups this past summer as well. So when I'm performing or when I'm in the hallways beatboxing, a lot of people ask me some questions, and I'd like to answer some of those now. So perhaps the most common question that I get is, why does your arm spaz out when you beatbox, like I mentioned earlier? Well, most beatboxers do this, and the reason is it helps them keep control of their beat and maintain all of their sounds. For example, when I make the sound, I go. When I make the sound, it's and the sound, it's. So when I put it all together, so when I make it into a simple beat, it sounds something like this. Now, as you can imagine, as the beat becomes a lot more complicated, my arm starts to spaz out. Another question I get is beatboxing harmful and does it hurt? Well, first of all, it doesn't hurt, except when you first start, because the muscles that you're using in very unfamiliar ways. Now, the other part of this question, is it harmful? I normally answer, no. Well, to confirm my hesitant response, I did some research, and I found some very interesting results that were very reassuring for me. According to a study done by the University of Illinois Hospital, beatboxing poses little risk of injury to the voice. So, the experimenter in charge of all this, he imaged 4 male beatbox artists, using a flexible fiber optic endoscope threaded through the nose and attached just above the vocal apparatus. Basically, they stuck a tube with the camera down their nose and looked at what happened when they beatboxed. So they performed various isolated and combination beatboxing techniques, and the results showed that beatboxing actually doesn't pose any risk to the voice because the beatboxers are using their entire vocal tract to produce a variety of sounds, which eliminates wear on any particular part. So for these reasons, beatboxing has a much more gentler effect on the vocal tract than, say, singing, for example, which relies more dependently on the vocal cords themselves. For these reasons, beatboxing can actually strengthen your voice. Now, the third question I get comes from anyone who sees my locker and asks, why do you have 35 half-drunk water bottles on the top shelf? Well, as many of you know, I beatbox all the time, whether in class or when I'm hanging out with you guys, whatever. And the thing is, when I'm beatboxing, I'm breathing in a very irregular pattern. So I may be holding my breath for up to 30 seconds at once, or I may be breathing in and out extremely fast. So this causes a lot of lightheadedness and dizziness, which is why water is a beatboxer's best friend. Now, the last question I get is, what is the hardest part about beatboxing? Well, there's a lot of difficult things about it, so I've narrowed it down to 2. Number 1 is speed. When you first learn a pattern, and when you've mastered a pattern or a rhythm, and you want to try to speed it up, it's very difficult to maintain control of every single one of your sounds. For example, when I go, and I want to speed it up, it sounds like this. Now, now the second difficult thing about beatboxing is that you're using muscles in ways that you're unaccustomed to using, especially when you first start beatboxing. And for example, when you're walking down the hall and a teacher says, "How are you?" you'd say, "Fine, thank you." You wouldn't say, "Fine, fine, thank you." And that would be pretty cool if you did that, right? So, the main point is talking and beatboxing, you use extremely different muscles when you're doing these things, and they feel completely different under force. So, for me, beatboxing has allowed me to go outside of my comfort zone and create music in ways that I didn't even know were possible. And I've been able to create my style based off of various other beatboxers, and I've even added some elements of humor to it. I've enjoyed beatboxing very much, and it's become a major passion of mine. So, I'd like to share with you before I end my speech some equipment that I brought with me today. Alright, so this right here is called a Voice Live Touch 2. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to add effects to my voice, so I can sing beautifully. And the most important part about this machine in terms of beatboxing is it allows me to loop, 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 my voice. So to conclude my speech, I'm going to do a short demo. Bum 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 bum